Hello, and welcome to What Moves Us, the podcast where we ask what moves us, or more accurately, what's going to move us in future.
With the Rail Innovation Group's Johannah Randall and Liam Henderson, we look at debates, themes, and decisions of the minute that will impact on the way we get about in the future. Hi, Liam. How are you?
I am good. It is 29th of February, Leap Day, and I'm very excited that we'll be talking to Chris Johns later on from PassageWay as our guest of the podcast. Before that, tell me about your week.
My week. Gosh, I don't know what's been going on in my week. I don't know. That's really stumped me, the question, because obviously I've been putting together a tender, which is probably really boring for our listeners, but I've been doing that with you and Debs.
Only if you've learnt lessons learned about public sector procurement to help. Was it
I think
procurement?
actually, well, I think what was really interesting about that procurement, I think it was the first time that I'd used the social value tool.
Right.
And I thought it was really interesting because I thought I could pick and choose. But what I learned was that there was about 30 of them were actually just mandatory to the tender, and you had to do them whether you could do it or not. And the thing that I found hardest to fill on it was not the fact that we couldn't deliver lots of interesting stuff. It was the fact that they wanted us to commit to carbon zero. And what I was trying to work out was that I was thinking as a startup SME, who we all work from home. Generally, we all travel by train or some form of public transport or cycle or whatever most of the time. How do we fill that in? Because we're already pretty good as in a comparison to other things. The only way I could work that, and you couldn't put in that we were already good. You couldn't put that. You weren't allowed to put in a baseline because it was called double counting. Because if we counted our train journeys, it was called double counting because that's already measured somewhere else within the system.
Oh, wow.
So I committed us to planting trees in order to meet the target.
Doesn't sound very future-proofed for organisations that are carbon zero. How will they apply in future?
No, it doesn't, because I'm sure we probably could have done much more imaginative stuff had the tool been designed differently. And I think that's probably part of the thing that we always talk about is the challenges of being an SME or startup. And I know that when we speak to Chris, he alludes to some of this as well, but we're not thinking of it in terms of social value at the moment. We're thinking of it in terms of just pure procurement, how it's set up for big corporations that need to reduce their carbon, or big corporations that have lots of people who can do some of this stuff for them, rather than half a dozen people in a startup where we're all pretty agile, pretty low carbon footprint anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe in the future we can put in getting solar panels put on our roofs or something because we work from home.
True that. Or net zero heating. We'll all move to a warm country. We don't need heating by train. I have
you might be in a warm country, being in the south.
Definitely balmy and warm at the moment.
And then, of course, you've been to a conference.
Yes. Well, I went to Interchange, which is in Manchester, which is always nice to go visit. Interchange it seems to be the conference for sort of public authorities involved in either transport or regional development. So there were the sub-national transport boards represented there, and there were the combined authority sort of transport fours represented there, all the suppliers. I was there to genuinely just see what was going on behalf of our members, because I think it's a commitment for the members to go. So it's not sort of a targeted buying, selling marketplace. It's more of like an information gathering. Andy Burnham did a speech at the end of the first day about what Manchester was doing in response to the cancellation of HS2. His message was more positive and optimistic than you would have thought. His gripe mostly was about access for all on the rail network, that it's very slow. But in terms of conversations on the day, I just thought it was interesting. My takeaway was that you've got these, apart from Transport for the North, there is other sub-national transport bodies around the country that are, like, you've got Transport for the East, Transport for the Southeast, Transport for sort of Transport Southeast. England's economic heartland, and they're all working out a policy for interregional connections and how they want their region to work together as a better block. Which one I thought was interesting is because we've already just now made the region silos, because the into and outer bit is less of a focus. But what I noticed was that there seemed to be sort of a disconnect between, let's say, the Midlands Connect area, which includes West Midlands, and then you'd go over to the booth of Transport for West Midlands, which is the combined authorities Transport for area, and they were having like detailed schemes, and we could discuss like they wanted to run this scheme to serve this area, this would be upgraded, you'd have a station here. But then if you talk to sort of Midlands Connect, the whole regional one, they're still talking about policy and nice to haves and ambitions, and it's like there seems to be a disconnect between like the much more localized areas who are just sort of plowing ahead with projects, and the whole region which was still developing the policy. So it seemed to be going the other way around.
It's interesting that force, isn't it? You know, because do you need policy, vision, and ambition, or have we got too much of that? And should we just get on and build stuff?
Well, I want to say because the local
you can almost say that's the failure of HS2, that there was too much discussing and not enough building and getting on with delivering. Because if we hadn't have had, you know, the 10 million reviews or whatever gone into it, we would, you know, and delays and etc etc etc, we would only be 2 years away from having the first phase open.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I could understand why it was happening that way, because particularly the people we were talking to, the West Midlands, they knew exactly what the local problems were, so they were finding solutions to the local problems, not how to get around the whole region and how to build a bigger region. So I guess they're targeted to doing different things. It's just the timescales seem to be different. One other takeaway was that you have transport, you have the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, the West Midlands Combined Authority, the Merseyside Combined Authority. So all the ones in England are getting sort of city regions, whereas in Scotland, there are no city regions for Glasgow or Edinburgh. So those cities don't end up as powerful a voice compared to English cities as time goes forward, because the Scottish government has control over those cities more so than the UK government does over English cities. So
I guess so. I mean, like, some of that is kind of geography, though, isn't it? And the way, you know, some of the systems have been, I mean, like, it's history, culture, geography, all sorts of things all into one. Because if you think, you know, sort of like where we were 30 years ago, where everything was controlled, you know, from the centre, and then with sort of like the 97 election, we've had, you know, periods of devolution of various aspects of it in order to give more local control. You know, that devolution to Scotland, you know, and to Wales, and that has come in its entirety as a nation, hasn't it? And it hasn't sought to put cities and regions up against each other. They've tried to look at it holistically in a balanced way. Because if you were to, I'm going to say, if you were to compare Scottish transport policy or Welsh transport policy versus, should I say, UK transport policy or English transport policy, it doesn't exist for England or UK, does it? It only, you know, so there's almost and the priorities are set differently. You know, it's not set in sort of like this scheme versus that scheme. It's set within the concept of the overall goal, which is net zero.
Yeah, but as I go back to what I was saying before, you might end up with a situation where, because there is more local powers coming forward in English city regions, you'll end up with more locally focused solutions, whereas to fix specific local problems, whereas in Scotland, you'll end up with a wider interregional vision.
Yeah, and that comes back to the geography thing, because if you think about, you know, sort of like, is it something like 70% of the population of Scotland live in 20% of the land space, which is the central belt? Yeah.
So it has to
So
be sort of one, I guess, anyway.
it kind of leads nicely into, talking about that, into what I'll be doing next week, is because I'll be going to the North of the Border conference, which is the conference for Scotland.
Ooh, where's that?
So that's at Glasgow next week. So that'll be exciting. I've got 2 days out next week, both in Glasgow.
You can do a podcast from there.
Not on the day, but I can do on the day after and say what we talked about. That would be exciting.
Committed. Right. Now's the time for us to join with our guest, Chris Johns from PassageWay. So, Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Liam. And thanks so much for inviting me on today to have a chat with you guys. So a little bit about PassageWay. We're a startup company. What we do is we encourage customers to choose public transport through the information that we present on real-time digital signs. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that we take real-time passenger information and put it out there into the community in ways that make it easy for people to understand, interpret, and act on.
I'm very thankful that you introduced that fully, so I don't have to ask you any follow-up questions. But let's step back a bit. So you're called PassageWay. What inspired the name?
Well, we set up the company to provide these digital signs, and it's based on the nudge theory. I don't know if you know too much about nudge theory, but it's
I do. Are you a follower of David Halpin?
Yeah, David Halpin, and there was a couple of other guys. Richard Thaler, I think, is the guy who wrote the book as well. Richard Thaler. I've got the book here actually. Hang on a second.
I was saying, I think I've got it on my bookshelf as well over there.
Yeah, Richard.
I think that didn't he win the Nobel Prize for economists for the economics for the book?
He might well have done. And according to my version that I've got here, the Sunday Times has called it hot stuff as well. It's sort of like
I'm sold.
Yes. Anyway, so they work on this idea of liberal paternalism, and liberal paternalism is that there are these people, which effectively is all of us to some degree or other, called choice architects. And what choice architects do they can influence how people behave by presenting information or decision options in a favorable manner. So basically, it's like taking, the classic example is, the sort of organ donation, which changed in the UK to being, physically opting in to opting out. So that many more people now opt in to, they're already opted in to do organ transplant. So that's a simple version of nudge. But really what we're saying is that we, as choice architects, can make it easier for people to choose public transport by making the information easy to act upon. So that's another bit. Why did we choose PassageWay as a name? Well, we were looking for something that was a nice, friendly, rounded brand that sort of signified movement and also signified an element of a journey as well. And obviously everyone knows what a passageway is, but it's also that sort of secondary interpretation of passage and then a way, as opposed to just a sort of alleyway between two places.
Yeah. Okay. So if we say about... Oh, sorry, Johannah, were you about to jump in?
I always want to explore something a bit more detail because I think it's interesting that you brought up nudge theory and the fact that we're choice architects and that, and because I've read the book and also I've read the David Halpin book as well, and I think essentially what they're trying to say is actually we're humans and we're not just economic robots, isn't it? Because that's really what's behind the theory, that we don't act in the way that economists expect us to do because we're human and we're free-willed and we make choices about our everyday lives and that about what we want to do, and so this is about applying some of that human-centered element of it and what we do because we are free-thinking people rather than just treating us like economic commodities that do things without those feelings.
I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, I mean, I think typically if you look at the world of public transport, there is an awful lot of, how can I say it, lack of human-centered design around the information onto the access points. So if you think about, I mean, a bus stop is a classic sort of, um, example of that, where you've got a lot of it is sort of, outside in sort of thinking, where you've got all the bus routes, which are number like 37, 3319, 137, whatever. And then you've got this, a totem with all those numbers on, route numbers. And then below it, you've got this sort of quite complicated route timetable and all the other stuff around it. And that is not really helping people make a choice. It's not really communicating, is that bus going to go my way? Is it going to stop? How long is it going to take to get from A to B? And so there's a lot of sort of, people just look at it and go, oh my God, I don't know, where I am, and is it going to suit my particular needs? So that's really sort of where we want to flip that on the head and say, well, look, here's the information about where all these routes are going. There's a real-time map of the route, so you can see contextually where it's going. You can see how long it's going to take, any disruption information, and you could see onward travel status as well. Because most journeys are not, just going from point A to point B, but there's typically a point C and a point D after that as well. So if you're going through London, you may be going from, like the other day, I went to a trade show, and so I went from Clapham Junction to Euston, and then got the train from Euston. Sorry, I went from Clapham Junction to Victoria on the Victoria line to Euston, and then from Euston I got the train up to Manchester. So there's multiple steps on that journey, and it's not very clear at the beginning of my journey if I have all the necessary information. Now, you might well say, well, we're in a digital age now. Everyone should have a mobility app. Everyone should be looking at stuff on their phone, to plan their personal journey. And that's fair enough. Those mobility apps do provide an outstanding customer experience for the individual. But the problem is, and, there was a report that came out, I think it was last year, by a body called, I think it's called, what are they called? London Transport Focus. Which is called Left Behind Londoners. And it's basically picks up or identifies the number of people in London who are digitally excluded or low digital users. And it's about 2.5 million, right? So if you think that the population of London is, 8-9 million now, something, I can't remember what the latest figures is, but you're running at about, 20 to 25% of the population of London that, can't really use or don't have access to the latest personal digital planning information via smartphone apps.
That's really interesting. So in terms of sort of like meeting that need of those digitally excluded people, you don't necessarily, because what type? I mean, because actually, before I ask my question, what do you mean by digitally excluded?
Well, digitally excluded means basically they don't have phones. They don't have a smartphone, or they don't have, maybe a PC or a desktop. They might have access to a desktop at home, but the definition is pretty much that they don't have, the latest, smartphone technology. They may have an old Nokia, for example, but they're not using, it to download apps and things like that.
And I guess when we sort of like talk, I mean, because I think a lot of people would be surprised at how high that number is for just our capital city in the UK. That is quite, I mean, because just sort of like that's just under sort of like 30% of the population.
Well, there's two elements there. One is digitally excluded and one is low digital usage. So digitally excluded is about 400,000 in London. And that data actually came from a Lloyd's report that was published in 2021. So that was just rolled into this particular one. The other side is low digital users, and they're about 2 million. So a low digital user is someone who, doesn't really, they may be on pay as you go, for example, and so they don't want to download or access the latest apps. They may have, not the latest technology, yada, 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 but they're basically not quite excluded, but they're definitely not going to be downloading mobility apps.
Well, also I would say that means also if you're using pay as you go and you have your data turned off, you're not having any real-time journey updates. So by the time you get to Wi-Fi, it's too late for you to have amended journey or whatever.
I mean, the ironic thing as well is that a lot of these people who are digitally excluded or low digital users, they are a core customer base for public transport in London as well, because of their demographic profile.
Yeah. So in terms of sort of like PassageWay, then, how does your product fill that gap and meet the digitally excluded or the low digitally enabled customer then?
So what we do is that we enable any screen to become a real-time passenger information digital sign. So showing all the appropriate public transport information around that particular place. And we've got different templates for different scenarios. So for example, if it was a bus shelter, you've got a particular type of sign that's deployed at a bus shelter with route maps and, you know, real-time departure information, disruption information, etc., etc. But we also have these other ones, these other digital signs that we actually distribute free of charge to any organization within the M25 that are they're multi-modal effectively, and they are for schools and hospitals, shopping centers, workplaces, anywhere really. Any organization can have one, but they are showing all the public transport options around a particular place, and provide real-time information and updates around those options. So for London, that is, you know, bus, bike, tram, train, tube, etc.
Cable car?
You know, we did a cable car actually. I don't even know. I think they tried to sell that, didn't they? I'm not even sure that. So I mean, we don't at the moment. So TfL, you may have noticed that the TfL boats are going up and down the Thames are no longer called. They're not TfL boats anymore. They're now Uber boats, aren't they? So that data is no longer available within the TfL API. So we've had to basically pull that as a mode from our signs, unfortunately.
Oh, right. For the benefit of anyone listening, is your Zoom background at the moment, we're talking to you through Zoom, you do actually have one of these signs in the background. So as you're speaking, I am referencing the picture behind you.
Yeah, that's a smart button. Yeah.
Very snazzy.
Yeah.
So when you say they're available for free, is that how are you funding the free ones?
So yeah, well, we are funded by Transport for London, and Transport for London effectively pay us to distribute these digital signs. So our job is to, you know, ensure that they are curated correctly, they're properly managed and delivered to the customer, and we deliver them as URLs. So we can do hardware as well, but typically, you know, they are for display on a pre-existing screen within a workplace or elsewhere, and we supply them as this self-updating web page, and ensure that it works on their particular screen, and then, you know, we host it and support it over time.
Oh, right. And how long is that? I have to admit, I was unaware of that program.
We've been doing it for a while now. I mean, I think we've got a few hundred signs live across London. You know, there is always massive opportunity to, you know, you would have thought that with millions of organizations across London, there would be millions of signs. We don't have millions of signs. I think in total at the moment, we've got about 400 or 500 sign licenses for London. So, you know, sort of heading in the right direction, but we would like to see them, you know, in many more organizations around London.
So what sort of organizations are you targeting there? Where, you know, sort of like in terms of meeting this need, where do you think they'd be most useful to get that trajectory?
We've got lots of different locations at the moment. So you'll find them in most of the hospitals around London. So they were put in, TfL actually pushed that, but during the pandemic, they were rolled out to nearly every hospital. You'll find them in a lot of schools, and in some doctor's surgeries, quite a few workplaces now as well. So in the headquarters of AXA in the city, that's a recent example. And also, we actually put in a 65-inch screen, or 75-inch screen actually, into, do you know Paternoster Square? You come across that? It's a nice,
Yes.
beautiful office complex by St Paul's. So we put in, they're doing a new refurbished office complex there, and we put a beautiful 75-inch screen, portrait style, into the foyer, which has this real-time information on as well.
Oh, right.
But I mean, they could be really pretty much anywhere, as long as, the organization, in case, in the organization that you're talking to has, sufficient traffic, human traffic going back and forth to warrant, promoting public transport. And it's great for TfL because, what better form of advertising can you have than real-time information? I mean, it generates demand for their services in a sort of non-intrusive manner. And, people really, the feedback we have is really, really, really positive.
So is this a model that could be expanded to other transport for areas easily?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, I mean, we have struggled to get beyond London. I mean, we've done projects in Melbourne, for example, in Australia, and we won an accelerator for Transport for Wales, and we've done projects over in Somerset as well. And we are in constant discussions with transport authorities, and other sort of our partners who we tend to work with, about deploying elsewhere as well. I mean, I think that, I know with the Rail Innovation Group, obviously it's about railways. But the thing with railway stations is that there is quite a lot already in terms of digital signage in railways. If you, like when I was going through Euston the other day, I mean, there's some beautiful screens up there, talking about all the next train to X, or, departures from X, whatever platform. And that's great. Again, it's all people leading people into those trains and those services moving off. There's not actually much coming the other way. So when you come out from your train and you're thinking, where do I go? I need to get down to Soho or whatever. You don't really know where to go and which bus is the right bus to get. And there are some QR code things in there as well. But I think as people are moving through the built environment, somewhere like that where it's very rapid, there's a high human turnover there. There's not a lot of dwell time unless you're standing there waiting for a train. There's not a lot of dwell time for, people scanning QR codes and then looking at their device. Really you want something that aids people as they move through that built environment, so in a similar way as people are moving through to catching their train.
And my sense of that is, I don't know if we're at the same show, but I was in Manchester the other day. It occurred to me as you come out of Euston, is they just want to get rid of you.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say that. Well, that's always the case with stations. Sort of like having worked in stations and on trains, is that I think stations do just want to get rid of you. But I just want to sort of like explore sort of like that challenge.
Yeah.
And also what we started the conversation with in terms of information and the fact that it's not designed for the human. Because do you think part of the issue, sort of like thinking about that Euston case study, is that it's designed by railway people and not enough by people who are actually travelling and see it. So there's almost an assumption that the system designed into the design process.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid point, and I think it goes back again to that sort of, the example I gave of the bus stop, where you've got a flagpole with a bunch of numbers on it, and then this timetable that's put underneath it. A lot of that is organization out information rather than considering what the customer needs in order to make their journey easier from A to B.
Yes, and I'd say I'm thinking about a previous project I worked on, but it was basically that even the waypoints are described by the people who live in the city or know the city. So the things that they're highlighting that the bus will go past doesn't mean anything to someone who's unfamiliar, who actually needs the information. It will be like a local colloquialism or a local landmark. I find it funny here in London, particularly, that lots of the buses end at pub names.
Do they? All right.
I,
The Royal Oak. The Royal Oak.
I never knew that, and I know the buses quite well in London as well. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean anything to international people.
But just thinking about, sort of like, I know we want to talk about rail culture or transport culture in general, and that thought about, because within recent years there has been a pivot towards, sort of like, we all know the slogans: putting the customer first, putting the passenger at the heart of everything we do. Whatever slogan you want to try, there's lots of there's lots of them around. How do we really do that? Because it still doesn't seem to be really working. And what would your challenge be as an SME to rail or transport providers to really start doing that and thinking about that?
Well, that's $1 million question, that one, isn't it? I mean, how do you get the whole massive juggernaut to change direction and turn on a pin? I think that it's a multi-dimensional question. I mean, there is, there's the physical architecture of the thing. So there are many more architectural firms that are applying human design elements to the built environment now. So they're less sort of moving capital from point A to point B, but to making that experience as humans move through that environment more efficient, more friendly, especially in terms of accessibility for those people that are less able-bodied than everybody else. And I think when it comes to information and putting information together in a manner that makes it easier for everybody to interpret and act upon, and that helps, as I say, as I mentioned earlier on, to nudge them. I think that really what you've got to do is you do sort of need to flip everything on its head and consider less the structure of the information, but actually the journey that people are going on to get them from A to B. So as an example, if you think about maybe route 319, for example, which is a bus route, that doesn't really mean anything to anybody. But if you were to plot, apart from the end destination might mean something Sloane Square and starting at Clapham Junction, or whatever. But if you plot that route on a map, and you say these are all the stops on that map that this bus is going to get to, and this is when it's going to stop. This is how long it's going to take to get from where you are now to each of these ones. Then most people aren't going to that particular. They're not just going to stop at that stop, but they're going to get off that stop, and then they're going to go and walk somewhere, or go and meet someone, or do something. And so if you plot all these things on a map, you've got context around that, and human context that says, okay, well, I'm going from I've got to get to there, and then I've got to go and walk over there that way a little bit. So you're saying it, rather than it being a whole bunch of just raw data. You're actually trying to contextualize it for people and put it into terms that they can easily reference within their own mind.
So actually, it's not just about my human need; it's also about the system within which I interact with. And there's sort of like, at the moment, transport's a bit detached from what I do in my journey and where I'm going to within that contextual system.
I think so for many people. If you've got a personal journey planner on your smartphone, then that does a lot of that for you. That's really its purpose, isn't it? Is to make your journey from A to B nice and easy peasy. But if you're one of the digitally excluded or low digital users, or you're new to the city, never been here before, a tourist, then actually a lot of those, you don't have access to those things, and all you've got is that sort of raw data. Then it's much harder for those people.
And I wonder if that's why people who are not digitally excluded, you often end up looking for So in a new city, you'll look up the bus and hope that it's on Google Maps because it's got a line that blobs through all the places that you're likely to be interested.
That's right. Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay. So you talked about the juggernaut of rail, of the established industry. So we're going to ask you the question we ask a lot of SMEs, which is, what are your main challenges dealing with this juggernaut?
Well, I think, and I'm sure that other SMEs or startups have had exactly the same issue, is that, by nature, we are a small organization. And, that has a number of positives. We're innovative, we're entrepreneurial, we can, turn things around very quickly, or come up with new ideas, invent things. But when it comes to procurement, from the larger organizations, the transport authorities, they don't really think like that. What they do is that they say, right, well, we need to get, X, Y, Z. We need to go and put in 300 or whatever widgets or whatever. And then they put a tender out. And with the tender, there's a whole range of criteria that go with that tender as well. Typically around, sort of financial strength, etc. How much you've got to be a certain turnover in order to be able to get something over the line with them. So that sort of excludes us from a lot of those tenders. And what we do in response to that is that we go in with larger organizations, partner with them, for the likes, just as an example, Trueform is a hardware manufacturer, and VIX is a technical supplier who provides real-time information, amongst other things. So what we would do is that we would go in under their umbrella, and we bring to their tender innovation, and a new stuff that is low risk for them, but possibly gives them an edge against their other competitors that they're tendering against. And we found that works pretty well, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, it must work for you to get this TfL work.
Well, we've got that independently, actually, but but other other projects, So I don't know. We're talking with people in various elements, whether it's in North America or elsewhere, and typically we're going in with a bigger partner. We're going in as the little guys on that, but bringing in, it's almost like, if you were the I don't know, big organization, and you say, right, well, we need to redo something or other, you might bring in a specialist team to go and do something, and we're that specialist team to go and bring something unique and innovative. We're the blue sky guys.
I think a lot of the tier ones like that, though, to bring in a startup or an SME to provide that innovation.
Yeah. When you say tier one, you mean tier one suppliers, do you?
Yeah.
Like suppliers. But I think also there's sort of a public policy backing for that to partner with smaller suppliers.
Yeah.
So
I think it's beyond that, though. I think it is just sort of like, because of, as you've alluded to, Chris, about being more, agile and freer in thinking, and maybe closer to the ground of some of the people that are buying what you want to sell.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're the ones that can take the risk effectively.
And with the solutions quicker, probably.
That's right. Yeah.
Leaner.
Yeah.
Is there anything surprised you about working in this wider industry?
Oh, I think, one of the things, I'm this isn't the first organization I've started. So, I used to run a digital agency, and I built a SaaS platform, software as a service platform previously that had been acquired. And, what I found in those other experiences were things were moved quite a bit faster. Whereas in the world of public transport, ironically, things don't seem to move that quickly. Which is good in some ways, because when you're in with an organization, you tend to be in with them for a very long time. But opportunities seems to be quite thin on the ground, so they come up, not very frequently. and also the sort of gestation period for them is quite extended as well. So you might think, well, they might put out a tender. Someone might put out a tender. Now we'll consider it, gathering interest for a tender, and then it goes to a tender, then it goes through the whole thing. So it might be 6 or 9 months before actually you get going on something. And again, as a startup, you really want to move quick. You want to get something done, you want to get it out, you want to talk about it, and you want to get all excited about it.
Yes. Well, hopefully you can be excited about new future projects.
Well, yeah, and we've got a few on the boil, but again, they take a while to go from conversation to getting it over the line.
I won't ask you when we're going to hear about them then.
No.
Okay. Fine then.
I've got one that is live now, but we've not been. We can't talk about it just yet because there's a news ring fence on it. But hopefully we'll be able to talk about that within a week or so.
Brilliant, exciting. Then we'll add that into the comments for this episode. If it's news by then, it'll go out.
It is news, yeah.
Right. Last question, which is one we ask all our guests, is what advice would you have for new suppliers?
I think that my advice would be to build relationships, and I think that it is quite tricky, coming into a new market and trying to make things happen. And as a startup, you want those things, as I say, to happen very quickly. But in this marketplace where you and I operate in, things don't happen very quickly. So the best route, in my opinion, is to build relationships. And that's to build relationships with, those tier one suppliers, show them how you can add value to what it is they're doing, but also to build relationships with the transport authorities and say, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is what we'd like to bring to the table. You might not have anything right now for us, but please keep us in your ecosystem, and then when something does come up, they will come to you.
Brilliant. Okay.
I kind of got a bit of a follow-up to that one, because obviously the whole sort of like reason doctrine for Rail Innovation Group is that we help you make those connections and build those relationships, which obviously we do through our mentoring and networking events that we have. But where else do you find your contacts? Just for our listeners.
Well, there's a couple of other groups that we are members of. There's I mean, I'm getting a bit geeky now, but not that you guys are geeky, right? You guys are really not geeky, but there is another one called the Sign Design Society, which, if you're into wayfinding and human navigation through the built environment, the Sign Design Society is the one for you. And they have a lot of community talks and things like that. There's also the Real-Time Information Group, where basically all the tier one suppliers are members of that. So that's really important for us as well. And going to trade shows and things like that. So we are, I think Liam and I were probably at the same show, different days. I actually personally, I struggled with that show a little bit personally, but I wasn't that impressed. But other people I know have really like it. But I think we are at the Connected Places Catapult Summit next month in March, and that's about. It's not just a public transport show; it's about bringing innovation into the UK society, community, economy. And so it's all those people who are interested in that sort of stuff, which includes a lot of public transport. We're going there, and we've got a little stand, and we hope to meet lots of people and network through that as well. So it's a mix, really.
It is. So I've kind of got just a little bit of a follow-up on that, because obviously when that part of that is about, going to lots of stuff, and I think we hear that a lot from our members, is that it is about, spreading yourself out far and wide to get yourself known. But also, sort of like a couple of those that you've mentioned, there's obviously cost involved. So how do you trade that off between being a startup and having to be sort of like, have an eye on your balance sheet,
Yeah.
well
So
as sort of like growing the business as well?
yeah, you're right. I mean, there's lots of marketing opportunities that one can do, and it's really trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. I mean, the good thing, and we've done it with you guys, was the World Passenger Festival. So quite a lot of these shows have the startup village, where you can get basically a free pod, sort of like 1 meter desk space with a graphic behind you, and you stand there and hope people come along and chat to you. But it's also quite good for networking with other people as well. So I mean, I would take up any of those free opportunities. I mean, they are only free. So you're not going to be in the best place in the exhibition, but it is about being out there and shaking hands and being present. And we also, we are paying for the Connected Places Summit. I mean, it's not huge amounts of money, but, we know that those are the right people for us. And, I think there are other shows as well, but it's, you've got to know I mean, there is always the argument, right? So am I better off just taking 5 people out for a slap up lunch, individually or collectively, and sitting down with them at a table and spending loads of money on them to introduce myself and say hello, or am I better off doing an exhibition and being in that sort of place, or going on a golf course and chatting with someone. I can't play golf actually, but
I was just thinking, you can still do that.
Yeah, but
Because nobody's ever invited me to play golf.
Learn, didn't you?
And I can
with
play.
the past floors. Or go shooting or something like that. There are all these things that people could do, but to my mind, trade shows are the appropriate place for us. And other networking events like your events that you run, and the ones that the other groups that we're members of run as well. And we blog a lot. I do blog a lot, and I'm quite present on LinkedIn, keep talking about stuff, and hopefully people appreciate it and start building a little momentum.
And appear on podcasts.
And appear on podcasts. Yeah, I love being on podcasts.
Cool. Chris, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really, really interesting.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of What Moves Us. We hope we moved you. For more episodes, you'll definitely want to subscribe to our channel.
Till next time.